IBM Pension Scheme, and can I inform members that this debate will finish at 5:19. Sandra Gidley.
Thank you, Mrs Dean. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to raise this today, and given the number of honourable members in the room for a short debate, it's a pity that we couldn't have had a longer one. And I've also received representations from the members for the Isle of Wight, Croydon and Solihull who express support for what I'm about to say. I and many other members have received large numbers of representations as a result of IBM's proposed changes to one of their pension schemes. The proposals have particularly impacted on workers in their 50s who had carefully planned their retirement, and many of those employees feel aggrieved at two levels. The first is they feel let down by IBM, which made certain promises about pensions a few years ago and is using the changes to force workers to retire earlier than planned. And secondly, they feel aggrieved that the government's pension law does not seem to provide them with sufficient protections. Now, it might be helpful to the Minister if I provide a little background. In 2003-04, many IBMers with a final salary scheme agreed to increase their pensions contributions by 50%. There was much unhappiness about having to do this, as the company had taken a pensions holiday for several years and also took funds from the final salary plan to fund the new defined contributions plan. In 2006, further changes were made to the defined benefit plan, and there was a clear attempt to move workers to an enhanced defined contributions plan. Workers who did not transfer were effectively punished because they were told that only 67% of future salary increases would count towards the pension. This makes something of a mockery of the fact that this was supposed to be a final salary plan. Now, although there was some unhappiness, the company ultimately managed to sell the scheme by promising that funding would be available until 2014 and that there would be no further changes until that date. Now, fast forward 3 years to 2009, and seemingly out of the blue, IBM announced further changes. Employees were understandably unhappy that IBM proposed to close the final salary scheme, although there has been an acknowledgement from some that this is the way that many company pension schemes are going. There was concern over the timing of the consultation, which was over the summer holiday period when many people were taking a break, and a feeling that that should have been extended. And in the annual report from the Pensions Trustee, the trustee stated, the trustee feels that the company has not lived up to the trustee's expectations in asking to change the plan and the scheme so soon after the changes made in July 2006. Now, that's quite a telling statement and quite an unusual one. Unfortunately, to add insult to injury, IBM made some hard-hitting changes to the early retirement terms and conditions, and this has had a significant impact on workers who had planned to retire over the next few years. The current scheme was that any employee retiring early would have 3% deducted from the pension for each year that they are under the age of 60. This effectively compensates for the fact that a person will be receiving a pension for a longer period of time. So, for example, someone retiring at 54 with an estimated pension of £20,000 would have it reduced by 18% to £16,400. The changes effective from April mean the discount is calculated differently. The calculation is now based on age before 63, with a market reduction which is estimated to be 6 to 7%. So if we assume a 6% rate, the reduction in the above example would be 54%, giving a pension of only £9,200. As one constituent put it to me, you're effectively stealing £7,200 every year for the rest of your life. And much of the correspondence has been rather emotive, a sample. In short, IBM is a very wealthy and very successful company, even in the midst of the credit crunch. It's not a question of IBM not being able to afford to fund its pension scheme. It's a matter of IBM choosing instead to give the saved money to its shareholders. Thanks.
I wonder if she will agree with me that constituents like mine, who are now having to retire as a consequence of all these new orders that have been put in place, would feel themselves immediately aggrieved about the proposals that have been made by this company.
Sandra Gidley.
Very much so, and they will lose out, as I'll go on to explain a little further. Yeah.
Will.
generous. Obviously, it is important. We are talking about a lot of constituencies that's affected by the closure of this pension scheme. Do you not agree, does the member agree with me, this is intimidation, bullying by a very wealthy company that is taking advantage of its employees and people are being forced out and we need to do more to protect them?
People very much feel forced out, and this has been described as redundancy by stealth.
I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way. I'd just like to reinforce the point for the Minister, and I wonder whether she would agree with me that when we and other honourable members met with the Chief Executive of IBM UK to discuss these matters, we pressed them on whether there was any reason why in the finances of the company they needed to do so. And he was unable to give any comparative data during that meeting showing why the company was under particular stress, nor did he provide any subsequent data. So that tells me, frankly, if you look at the fact that they made record profits in 2008, that this company has no reason for reneging on the obligations which is undertaken to...
The honourable member has saved me from having to go through part of my speech later, but certainly I think we were all quite appalled that so little explanation being given. Mr. Cairns.
David Cairns.
Thank you very much. The Honourable has been incredibly generous. Is she aware that over 70 people in IBM Greenock have been forced out of the door by this shoddy move by IBM? And that at a time when we're encouraging long-term thinking in business, this will have a detrimental impact. The loss of such highly experienced and excellent people will have a detrimental impact on IBM, and maybe that's connected with the announcement yesterday that the Chief Executive who's made these decisions is now gone.
Yes.
Sandra Gidley.
Yes, I think the Chief Executive has been promoted, but there are over 800 nationwide who are affected by this.
Stephen Pan.
Subject to Chief Executive, Sam Palmisano, the Chief Executive of IBM in America, has just seen his pension increase by $20 million to $40 million. Does she not find this very, very difficult to justify?
Yes, and of course Brendan Riley's part of a different pension scheme, and his pension will be intact when he moves on to his new job.
Clark.
I hope she understands that the number of interventions shows the anger in the country on this issue and the anger from IBM employees. And would she agree with me that the treatment of IBM of its employees is severely affecting its reputation?
Very much so, and I think people will think twice about whether they want to work for a company which does treat its employees in such a shoddy manner.
Cunningham.
Because I know somebody that works there, so I want to make that point. But I think there's something more fundamental to this, because a lot of these pension schemes, if you look at the origins of them, particularly if you look at the age group of the over 50s that's going to be hard hit here, we're all part of wage negotiations. For example, sometimes you negotiate an increase in pensions to offset a wage increase and additional holidays. So it's far more fundamental than that. And if ever a group of people were entitled to get their full pension without the changes, it's this group of workers.
Would Mike... whilst we're at it, on that very last point, it isn't just people who are over 50. I have a number of people affected in my constituency. I want to quote very briefly, Mrs Dean, from an email that I've had from a gentleman who says he will not be 50 by April of this year, therefore he doesn't have the option of taking early retirement, and thereby avoiding the worst impact of the changes that will be brought in from April of this year. And he outlines his main concern is that IBM are not only closing the direct benefit pension plan, as indeed many other companies have, it's also taking the more drastic step of massively increasing the penalties for early retirement, as my honourable friend has indicated. And it will have a devastating impact for future pension plans for people like him. Does my honourable friend agree this really is a very shabby way to treat loyal and dedicated employees?
Sandra Gidley.
Yes, and it's a testimony in some respects to IBM as it has been as an employer, that it has such a large number of employees who've stayed loyally with the company and have now reached their 50s and don't feel that they've been treated well after the time and investment and professionalism that they have devoted to the company.